what happened was not cute. Yeah, there was drama. It wasn't me, I'll put it that way. Went behind our backs and tried to make a separate deal for a spinoff just for herself.
On TV, they played best buddies. But in real life, things were far worse. While filming their much-anticipated TV return, one of the actresses from The Facts of Life attempted to amass wealth independently of the others. They froze for months because the betrayal was so horrible. Not even the late TV icon Norman Lear could mend it before he passed away. The shocking identity of the popular celebrity who permanently severed their connection has surprised fans, and it's the last person anybody anticipated. Big problems arose for NBC in 1979. In terms of viewership, it ranked last among the three main television networks. Little House on the Prairie was the only successful show on the network. The others were complete busts, including the infamous Supertrain, an ill-fated attempt to recreate the glamour of Love Boat on tracks. NBC's millions of dollars had gone down the drain with no return. Desperation gripped the network. In contrast, Different Strokes wasn't a complete bust. People like it, particularly due to Gary Coleman, even if it wasn't a huge hit. The head of NBC at the time, Fred Silverman, understood they had to maximize anything was even somewhat successful. He was now attempting to save NBC after previously assisting CBS and ABC in their respective successes. Therefore, he gambled. The Facts of Life, an NBC spin-off of Different Strokes, premiered in the summer of 1979. Out of 79 shows that summer, it rated 74th. Thus, at initially, almost no one watched it. At first glance, it appeared to be yet another dud, but the second season turned things around. A dramatic shift in the show's format caused it to skyrocket in popularity. Season 3 saw The Facts of Life rise to the position of #1 comedy on NBC. Much of that achievement is attributed to Charlotte Rae. On Different Strokes, she portrayed housekeeper Edna Garrett. They referred to Rae as a character actor because of her ability to portray powerful and distinctive characters. With her years of experience, she was clearly an expert in the field. And thought occurred to her, what if her heroine worked at a girls' school and had her own show? In her proposal to NBC, she ensured that she could continue working on Different Strokes in the event that the spin-off did not succeed, protecting her career from potential destruction. That was the right choice. Prior to Different Strokes' first season conclusion, Fred Silverman had already decided to spin off Mrs. Garrett's character. This had never been done before, but Silverman went with his instincts instead of following protocol. He was attempting to replicate his success at other networks by bringing major series to NBC. He approached Norman Lear about producing Different Strokes since he knew Lear enjoyed collaborating with Charlotte Rae from her appearances in Lear's previous productions. Silverman wasted no time in hiring her to play housekeeping and then stepped up his game. In spite of his lack of knowledge about the character's reception, he proceeded to give Rae her own program. He intended to restructure NBC's roster, and this was a part of that goal. Hill Street Blues, Cheers, St. Elsewhere, and other smash classics were all born out of that concept, but it all began with The Facts of Life. While researching for the 1979 Different Strokes spin-off, Charlotte Rae visited Bear's Westlake School for Girls. At first, her only goal in being there was to get a feel for the place. Nonetheless, she soon found herself swept up in an unforeseen event. She and producer Norman Lear were tasked with being shown around the school by a 13-year-old girl called Mindy Cohn. Mindy had never pretended. She was only being hilarious, endearing, and unrehearsed. I was satisfied. Lear and Rae were so enchanted by her character that they crafted a whole new one for her. Even though Mindy didn't try out for the role, she was cast as Natalie Green. It seemed as if nothing had changed. All of a sudden, she was appearing on a popular TV show while continuing to do her homework each night. It was the same as trying out for the tennis team in her parents' eyes. Simultaneously, a girl called Kim Fields was preparing for an audition. At 9 years old, she nearly didn't go since the room was filled with older females who appeared to have stepped out of a magazine. After giving her a pep talk in the restroom, her mom stopped her from turning around and leaving. Even her own anxieties, she admonished Kim, should not stand in her way. Despite being cast as a 12-year-old, Kim got cast as Tootie thanks to that encouraging word. The one and only issue was her little stature. The producers had to think outside the box to give the impression that she was taller than the other females. On roller skates, they slipped her. One of the most recognizable visual oddities of the program, it also became an integral element of her character's personality. Additionally, Molly Ringwald was there for that inaugural season. She performed the role of a politically active, outspoken girl named Molly Parker when she was 11 years old. She was one of 7 females who started out on the program, but things changed after the first season bombed. Molly was considered too young for the new direction, which the network sought to tighten. Like the rest of the original cast, she was fired. She had immense discomfort as a result. She admitted afterwards that getting dumped was embarrassing, but that the setback was short-lived. Her breakout roles in 16 Candles, Pretty in Pink, and The Breakfast Club catapulted her to Hollywood stardom in a matter of years. The Facts of Life was in a terrible state when it premiered in 1979. Nearly no one was paying attention, the script was uninteresting, and the cast was excessively large. Just another long-forgotten spin-off, it seemed. After the first season, NBC was about to cancel the show, but one executive was determined to keep it going. An NBC star on the rise, Brandon Tartikoff, saw promise. Even though co-creator Norman Lear despised the show, he battled to keep it running. Despite Lear's request to have his name removed from the credits because he considered the program was so bad, he still made about $30 million. The program he had zero interest in became a treasure trove of money. Everything changed after that second season. They began by removing the cast. With no major goodbye episodes or any explanation, the show narrowed its attention to 3 girls, Blair, Natalie, and Tootie, from the initial cast of 7. Molly Ringwald, who would later become a major Hollywood actress, was one of the females dumped. It was precarious. The audience didn't understand why Blair, who had before looked down on the younger ladies, now pretended that they were closest friends. Despite the clumsy change, the program gained focus thanks to the narrower cast. It went from seeming like a mishmash to a genuine series. Then there was Nancy McKeon, who made an appearance as Jo Polniaczek, a Bronx tough girl sporting a motorbike and a leather jacket. Everything changed when she appeared in her first scene, fighting with Blair while smeared in grease. Although McKeon was first panned by reviewers for being too rough around the edges, she swiftly won over supporters. Jo added a bite to the act. She gave it an authentic vibe. Things weren't always rosy behind the scenes. McKeon came clean about how challenging it was to grow up on the program later on. There was continual pressure on the cast, who were all teens, to maintain a certain body type and appearance. "You're basically filming someone's puberty," she said after the fact. There were times when the spotlight was cruel. Locations were also adjusted for the show. After a while, it outgrew the dorm and into the school cafeteria, where the girls interned with the now former school nutritionist, Mrs. Garrett. It was more like a workplace and less like a sleepover because of that, which allowed the authors greater independence. Theft of lobster from the school kitchen, a posh prep school indeed, was one of those hilarious, strange, and even crazy events. After that, the ratings skyrocketed. The Facts of Life shot up the ratings ladder in under a year, going from NBC's lowest-rated sitcom to a top performer overall. Although a different time slot was helpful, the real game-changer was the retooling. By the end of Season 3, it had surpassed all expectations and became the top comedy on NBC. It even outperformed its predecessor, Different Strokes. It wasn't only the humor that held viewers' attention, it was the genuine emotion. This program didn't sugarcoat its real-life themes, which included racism, drugs, eating disorders, and death. It wasn't only about school uniforms and food battles. Lisa Whelchel, who played Blair, requested to sit out of a particularly controversial scene involving underage sex due to her religious convictions. Despite NBC airing it with a parental advisory, It managed to stay in the top 25 that week. Its theme tune, too, became an enduring classic. "You take the good, you take the bad" is a memorable statement that was penned by Alan Thicke, Al Burton, and Gloria Loring. Loring was the one who performed it. Even though it evolved somewhat over time, the tune remained popular and people continued to sing along. With his famous 24-second pitch for the whole show analogy, Thicke once summed up the process of producing a theme tune. Considering how near the program was to cancellation, it's hard to imagine it happened. But after making some daring changes, a new cast, a new location, and more energy, The Facts of Life managed to turn things around. Despite its shaky beginnings, the show persevered and eventually became one of the most popular sitcoms of the 1980s. On the other hand, things weren't looking well behind the scenes. Mindy Cohn seemed somewhat different when she came back to the set after her summer hiatus. She had adjusted her metabolism, become more active, and slimmed down naturally, as do many youngsters. However, the producers took her aside and demanded to know what had transpired, rather than complimenting her on her good health. They were unhappy and advised her she should put on the weight again. The news shocked Mindy. Although the creators obviously perceived her as the fat girl, the role she played, Natalie, was never formally referred to as such. They preferred it if she remained that way. It was too much for Mindy's mom. A firm no came from her as she intervened. She suggested them see what genuine high school girls looked like by visiting one. Since Mindy was adamant about not regaining the weight, the costume crew devised a novel approach. They began wearing her in baggy clothing in an effort to give the impression that she was heavier when filmed. It was harmful for adolescent girls to grow up under such pressure since it was only focused on beauty, and nobody appeared to care. As soon as the camera stopped rolling, nothing improved. Notable comedian Joan Rivers started using lines from The Facts of Life into her stand-up shows. The joke about her naming it The Fats of Life persisted. Word spread quickly despite the lack of internet connectivity in that era. It made its way to the show because of the females. I saw it on TV. They were well aware of Joan's words, according to Lisa Whelchel. When Mindy asked her audience whether they had watched the most recent episode of The Fats of Life, Rivers turned it into a regular segment. The females had no choice but to accept the mockery in stride. Because they were sick of hearing about weight, they avoided discussing it on set, yet it persisted nevertheless. Disgrace was not the only thing Lisa Whelchel had to face. On occasion, the filmmakers would even have her weigh herself while they were filming. According to her, that eventually became the norm. They sent her to weight loss programs instead of giving her a rest during the show's vacation. They would provide her a plane ticket to a fat farm, even though she claimed to be returning to Texas. She had just turned 16. In the midst of her parents' divorce, her body was undergoing significant changes, and she received nothing but criticism and criticism alone. At one point, carrot and celery sticks replaced the donuts and cookies at the craft table. Despite her assurances that it was never nasty, the underlying message was that her physical appearance was inadequate. Not only did they suffer bodily harm, but psychological wounds that lingered for years as well. Talking about her experience growing up on camera, Nancy McKeon reflected on her time on the show, which she started at the tender age of 14. We documented, monitored, and evaluated every step along the way from adolescence into maturity. According to psychologists, being in the public eye exacerbates the already precarious state of body image that adolescents experience at this time. According to Lisa, it was like fighting an uphill struggle every day. You couldn't shake the sensation that someone was watching you and judging you. When young people are subjected to such pressure, their self-perception alters. Constantly monitoring and fretting becomes a mental cycle. You get so preoccupied with your appearance that you lose sight of who you are. Actress Lisa Whelchel played Blair Warner on Facts of Life when she was a teenager. Despite the show's success and Lisa's meteoric rise to stardom, she had to make a difficult decision early on in the course of the show. It was the creator's intention for Blair to lose her virginity first, as part of a major plot point. On the other hand, Lisa was opposed to it. A key component of her identity was her faith. She had been a Christian since the age of 10. It wasn't only a matter of her convictions. She also felt a duty to the young viewers who looked up to her. She told them straight out, "That's not something I can be a part of," when they presented the notion to her. She was skeptical that a single episode crammed in between commercial breaks could do justice to such a weighty subject. It was a risk she was unwilling to accept. Her career may have taken a hit. Not many young performers would have been able to say no to such a substantial plot point, particularly on such a popular program, but Lisa did. Contrary to her expectations, the producers honored her choice, which was unusual in Hollywood. For 7 years, the concept remained dormant, but it was far from forgotten. It did not appear on the screen at all. The authors then made the decision to revive it in the last season. Mindy Cohn's Natalie was handed the tale instead of Blair this time. Mindy seemed unconcerned about it, in contrast to Lisa. After allegedly saying, "Hey, I'll do it," when producers brought it up, the episode ultimately aired in 1988, towards the end of the show's run. 21-year-old Natalie loses her virginity to her lover Snake. The show presented their choice as an adult couple in a committed relationship, and they had been dating for a year. That was a pivotal point. With people in their 20s, a program that had shied away from discussing sexuality for almost a decade was now doing it. That struck some as humorous. Despite being titled The Facts of Life, the show spent the most of its existence evading the most important truth. The critic made a joke about how the program didn't live up to its name because it wasn't until the last season that anybody had sexual relations. And by that point, they were all grown-ups. Even though it was a comedy, NBC handled the show differently when it aired. A parental alert warned that the content may be inappropriate for children right from the start. Particularly for a comedic piece, such type of caution was unusual back then. The program nonetheless managed to do well in the ratings, with a commendable 22nd place that week, despite the caution notice. Some people were happy with the show's treatment of the subject. They said it wasn't hurried or cheap, but others were unhappy with the other characters' reactions. People were irritated because they thought the girls were subtly judging and even shaming Natalie. The program was sincere and reflective for those of us in our golden years, but it came off as trite and preachy to those of us in our younger years. Plans for a reunion film did not begin to take shape until 2001. The majority of the ensemble returned for further episodes, but Nancy McKeon formally declined. She claimed a schedule conflict with filming The Division as the reason, although there was really more to it than that. During the first discussions, she had made a joke about how, similar to The Big Chill, they should bring Jo back as a ghost. Somehow, that joke stuck. Production on the picture proceeded even after September 11th, when the world was undergoing terrible changes. Filming had already begun prior to that date, and was continuing throughout. A tale about the girls getting together for Thanksgiving was shared at the reunion. Natalie connected them. Blair oversaw a hotel empire. Tootie, rechristened Dorothy, hosted a chat show. Despite Jo's absence, her daughter made an appearance. Surprisingly, the actors had previously vowed to each other that they would never work together again on a reunion picture. However, as time went on and circumstances changed, the majority of them eventually agreed. You Light Up. My Christmas, a Lifetime holiday film created by Kim Fields, brought back the original 4 actors in 2019. It had been years since their last on-screen appearance. She treated the ladies like sisters and included them in the process of picking out their outfits and names for their characters. Numerous subtle references to the original series were sprinkled throughout the film, and as a heartfelt memorial, the town's ice skating rink was named after Charlotte Rae, who had tragically died the previous year. The crowd thought it was a nice touch. A near-perfect reviewer even went so far as to say it was entertaining and lighthearted. Unexpectedly, in December 2021, ABC broadcast a live show in which famous people played out scenes from classic comedies. 2 shows were featured, Different Strokes and The Facts of Life. Many were enchanted. Millions of viewers tuned in, and critics praised it. Notable actors and actresses such as Octavia Spencer, Amy Poehler, and Jennifer Aniston all expressed their preference for the facts of life during an after-show discussion. Everything shifted at that instant. Even though he was in his late 90s, the show's famed producer Norman Lear was keeping an eye on things. It had taken him by surprise to learn how many people still cared about the program. And then he did the unthinkable. He contacted Mindy Cohn, Lisa Whelchel, Kim Fields, and Nancy McKeon, the show's original 4 stars, and asked them if they would be interested in returning for another season. It was an odd time. Even though the globe was still reeling from the epidemic in 2022 and everyone stayed indoors, the prospect of a reset piqued people's interest. Strict conversation ensued amongst the 4 ladies. They reunited after a long separation and had a great time chatting, sharing ideas and laughing on Zoom. A writer was even brought in to assist with the reboot's development. Norman Lear also got involved. He was rather old, but he still contributed notes, ideas, and direction. Reunited after a long separation, the original cast was reimagining their beloved show with a fresh perspective. That was nice. I could feel it in my bones. And then, it all came crashing down. After decades of tight friendship, the cast members all of a sudden began to mute each other. It was in an interview Mindy Cohn gave in July 2024 that she discussed it. She said that one of the actors had been plotting her own spin-off in secret, despite everyone's suspicions. Almost unprecedented in Hollywood, the decision triggered a tidal surge of emotions that severed a friendship that had lasted for 4 decades. Everything shifted, though, following the treachery. After months of silence, they broke the ice with some insincere small talk. When characterizing their speech patterns, Cohn used the term "we do-ish." At this point, it was only courteous, superficial interaction. It stung considerably more because of how it happened. They had been collaborating closely on Zoom during the epidemic, creating the resurrection together. They had Norman Lear's approval while they planned the plot and came up with concepts. Even Lear, who passed away in December 2023, made an effort to mediate, but it was in vain. That was the end of it. Cohn had already made it plain in that interview that the trust had already been lost and would never be recovered. There was absolutely zero interest in collaborating again, she stated. For other famous groups, that might not seem startling, but for this one, it was heartbreaking. They had been steadfast in their all-for-one, one-for-all stance for a long time. By avoiding conflict and sticking to collaborative choices, they ensured that each other's reputations would be maintained. It wasn't only on a personal level. They had already engaged a writer for the revival, and actual preparations were in motion. But everything fell apart when one of them prioritized financial gain over friendship. It seemed unbelievable to Cohn that someone would risk such strong, devoted ties for the sake of a solitary career. It was always a plus for fans of the facts of life that there was never any drama behind the scenes. Part of the show's charm was its spotless presentation. Mindy Cohn, Nancy McKeon, and Lisa Whelchel had an intriguing appearance together on The Drew Barrymore Show in February 2024. On her birthday, they sprung a surprise on Drew by surprising her with a special gift bag that was once reserved for cast members of The Facts of Life. A tender, moving moment unfolded. They remembered Charlotte Rae and reminisced about simpler times. Drew became emotional as she spoke about how the program influenced her view of friendship and autonomy as a child. However, viewers began to notice something months later. Kim Fields was absent. Curious eyes widened at that omission. Did she opt out of joining, or was she left out? That was the question on everyone's mind. What does that reveal about the cast's present alliances? The dominance of internet detectives was rapid. People began scouring her Instagram after Cohn dropped hints that her present acquaintances would reveal the identity of the betrayer. Their findings added gasoline to the fire. Cohn had recent photos with Fields and McKeon, but none with Whelchel. To me, that was a major hint. Some people still didn't think so. Someone saw that Fields wasn't at the Drew Barrymore reunion, which might lead them to believe that she is the one responsible. Welchel was seen by some as the outcast because of how Cohn had consistently characterized her as being most like Tootie Fields and Joe McKeon. Lots of people started talking on Reddit afterwards. On fan forums, viewers began drawing parallels between their own actions and those of the show's characters. Welchel was compared to Blair by some who saw ambition, self-centeredness, and an insatiable need for attention in his every move. The web had mostly reached a consensus by the end of July. Welchel was named in the articles as the one who had lied to everyone. Although there was no formal confirmation, the verdict had already been cast in the court of popular opinion. Fandom was caught in the middle of what started as enthusiasm for a long-awaited reunion and ended in sadness and bewilderment. The ties that previously bound the ensemble appear to have snapped forever.